Thanks, Gwen. I'm Poe Bronson. I'm Managing Director of India Bio and General Partner at SOSV. I'm very excited today to explore the world of alt proteins with three terrific founders of three amazing companies from around the world. I have Dr. Inja Radman from New Culture, I have Dr. Lisa Dyson from Air Protein, and I have Dr. Sanjay Sriram from Shiok Meats. And I want to set the stage for a minute here for alt proteins. We are in the middle of what is perhaps one of the greatest consumer changes in all of history. But we're at a point in a nascent industry where 70% of consumers have tried some form of alternative proteins, but it still only represents 2.5% of the market. So the consumers seem willing. It's the next generation of products that's going to take us there. And while we might be thinking that here in the US we're eating less meat, or we're going to at least reach peak meat in 2025, globally, meat consumption has gone up 58% this century so far. So we're running into a battle with just the rise of the global middle class and the massive volumes here at work. So let's start out with each of you, some panelists. Inja, let's start with you. Just tell us a little bit about the new products you have coming to the market and the impact they have on the climate, and then we'll go around the room.
Hi, sure. Thanks, Bo, and thank you for having us today. We at New Culture, we are obsessed with cheese. What is at the heart of our company is love for the product, but not for the process and the way that it's been produced with today. So what we're doing to change that status quo in the dairy industry at New Culture, we are producing the hero ingredient, the key ingredient that you can find only in animal milk in nature, that is casein protein, which is directly responsible for all the properties of cheese that we just love and can't get enough: the melt, the stretch, the mouthfeel, the yumminess. So by making this animal-free casein and actually using it as a key ingredient and turning it into cheese products, we are disrupting the dairy industry, in particular the cheese industry of today.
Thank you. And let's go to Sandia at Shiok Meats. We want to describe what you're doing there from Singapore, and how it's influencing this sector.
Sure, thanks, Bo. So Shiok Meats is a cultivated seafood companies, and what we do is we take stem cells and create shrimp, crab, and lobster meats with the same taste, the delicious flavor that we all love, and nutritious as well, except that this is environment friendly and cruelty free. And recently, we also acquired a red meat company called Gaia Foods, so we are expanding our product portfolio as well. Thanks.
It's exciting. And Lisa, you've got a really unique proposition here about the impact on the climate. Why don't you share it with people?
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. I'm really excited to be here. So at Air Protein, we're making meat from elements of the air. So you may wonder, how do you do that? Well, we start by making a protein ingredient in a novel way. And that protein ingredient is made with a process that's very similar to fermentation, but it's fermentation reimagined. And it's reimagined in a way where our current way of doing fermentation, CO2 is actually a byproduct. And instead, we flipped it and we've made it carbon negative way of doing manufacturing using elements of the air as our inputs. And the impact is significant. We take that protein, we apply culinary techniques like temperatures and different pressures to create the textures that you get when you bite into a juicy steak or chicken breast. And that's how we make air meat. And the impacts are that this process itself is carbon negative. So you have less carbon, on the output when you have that steak on a plate, as it were, versus the current process of making a steak, and it's actually negative in terms of its carbon footprint. So that's one of the key pieces. The land utilization, the water utilization, thousands of times less than the alternatives out there. So the impacts are significant from the perspective of climate, and we can scale, just as you can scale any yogurt manufacturing or cheese manufacturing type of process.
So I'm going to ask you to speak to the whole industry now. We've got a lot of investors in the audience, and we also have a lot of founders and new founders. So I'm going to ask this question in a provocative way. Will there be a Google of meat? Will there be a Facebook of crops? Will there be an Apple of dairy? Silicon Valley tends to create these massive winners, these global sized $1 trillion winners. Food industry has lots of winners today as big companies, but it still has room for your small restaurant chain, still has room for a local farmer. And I'm to investors, I'm curious, how much are you focused on trying to win it all or just make a good pizza? And I'm wondering how, like, with your positioning with your investors, how much this we're headed towards a future with thousands and thousands of winners or just a handful of winners, which is what Silicon Valley does to other markets. Lisa, why don't we start with you?
Well, the main thing that I'll say is that those of us that are doing this, we have to win. And we have to win because there's going to be 10 billion people on the planet by 2050. And the current way of making food is emits more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. All of our planes, our trains, our trucks, and our cars combined. And it uses a significant amount of land. And so as we go from our current population today, the 10 billion, where's all that land going to come from? Where it's all, we're going to have all this carbon. So we actually have to win. Now, what is that going to look like? How many of us will win? Well, it will definitely be a smaller number than those that start. That's just how it works in the startup world. We just heard there's a great acquisition that just happened. There'll be acquisitions, lots of those. There'll be big companies that emerge, but these are complex supply chains. In the end, we are all making the supply chains less complex. And that's why, this industry, this sector will win. And so there'll be probably not as few. We won't be as, like the Googles in that we can't scale in the same type of way. We actually have to build things. We have to build manufacturing that takes longer and, produce large volumes of product that we then have to have a distribution sort of way to get that into the marketplace. So it's just very different. So there are big meat companies today. There are big food companies today. There will be big alternative meat, alternative protein companies tomorrow.
Sandy, how do you look at this? And I mean, you've just described, you just did an acquisition. Congratulations. Can a new a brand new startup apply? They apply to IndieBio all the time. A new one and wants to do cell-based lobster. Can they compete with you, who's been out there for years, progressed to this point? If they call themselves, well, we're the cell-based lobster of South Africa.
No, I think I'm looking forward to more companies doing cell-based crustaceans, honestly. I think we've been quite lonely and we've been sort of, I mean, on the IP side, on the asset side, yes, we'd like to have worldwide sort of, an upper hand on the IP. But honestly, if somebody else comes and tells me tomorrow that they want to make cell-based crustaceans, like you mentioned, for the South African market, I'll be like, sure, why don't you license our tech instead of
Yeah.
starting it from scratch, So isn't that the way you sort of expand businesses? And, driving back to Lisa's point, we are going to be 10 billion in population in the next couple of decades. And that means how can it, the question that I have is how can it be one company that feeds the 10 billion with alternative protein? It just can't, or a few companies, like you mentioned. We are looking at a rapid increase in mass production of alternative protein in the next decade. And that's not going to happen by just 5 or 10 companies. It has to happen by a couple of hundred. Unfortunately, as every sector is, some companies would die through this journey, either because they couldn't scale or they couldn't get funded or various other issues. But I think the people who sort of stand strong and put their head in the game and make sure that they can move forward, they'll be able to sort of flourish at that point. But I truly believe in larger companies like us being able to license our tech to other smaller companies so that they can expand beyond what they're looking at. And we can expand beyond the markets that we are looking at currently. Just to run by some numbers, the meat and the seafood industry is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, as you know. Just the crustacean industry alone is worth about $150 billion. And you can imagine how much metric tons that is at the end of the day. And honestly, if I'm going to say that I'm going to be this only global company that's going to be producing it, nobody's going to believe me, and I don't believe myself. So if I'm pitching to investors and the consumers in the market, what I'm saying is I've started that innovative technology, but here it is, and why don't you work with us to sort of expand and bring it to mass scale production? And we're happy to work with you if we are not in that particular geographical location, for example.
That's helpful. And let me turn this bring this question along to you, Inya. Like in the dairy space, there's certainly competitors doing exactly what you're doing. You're kind of unique, at least right now. How much are you under pressure to win it all, or just make sure you have a really good company that's solid and doing what and achieving its goals and executing its milestones?
Mhm. I think, Paul, what you just said goes really hand in hand because to win anything and to win it all, you do have to have a really good, strong company that stands on its ground now and that will survive for what Sandhya was saying, the turbulences of the competition and of the market for years, and that will kind of outlive that and be there in 10, 20, 100 years time. So at New Culture, as I say, we're very obsessed with cheese, and we're obsessed with making the best product, the best cheese out there. And we are really 100% focused on doing that. And I believe that that's what propelled us to where we are today, is that focus, because it's really, really easy to try to do too many things in the early days and then kind of split thin and do a bit of everything and in the end kind of nothing that you are really best at. So um, that's a kind of strategy and approach I would kind of propose to competitors and to market and to new entrants. So when you are asking for like, is there space for I don't know how you phrase it, like thousands or millions or 100 or 10 of companies to get out there? I think there is definitely space for thousands of companies because I'll just focus on the dairy industry itself because that's what's kind of home to us. Just in the U.S., dairy market is about $70 billion large market, and focusing on cheese specifically, cheese is half of that actually, nearly $35 billion. Statistic people maybe don't know is that Americans on average eat about 35 pounds of cheese per year per person. So in our industry, the challenge is, and in general, alternative protein, and it will be for some years, is the supply, right? Not the demand. Demand is so large that, even with many companies being really successful, it's going to be challenging to meet that demand with our supply. So there's absolutely space for everyone. What I would say is, um, like, who can survive and what are the successful strategies? I would say if companies will just kind of do come out and do kind of something same or very much similar to what other companies are doing in the field, even though in long term there might be space for them, they will just die out pretty early because it's going to be really hard to convince investors and get funding, saying that we're just like New Culture, but in whatever X country, we're just like Air Protein, but in another country. That's just not good enough. Like I think the more creative thinking is like, what is there that it's a problem still in this industry that hasn't been solved, for some very specific focused angle, something that you can really be like obsessed with and you want to solve and tackle. And that way I think there's definitely space for new companies to come and be very focused and say, we want to make this creamiest Greek yogurt in the world, or we want to make the fluid yogurt. That's what we're going to be best at. So that's the strategy we have at New Culture. We, as I said, we want to make the meltiest, the stretchiest, the best tasting, best cheese in the world, better than dairy cheese that doesn't come from animals. And we want to absolutely conquer the market and be the market leader in that. And for that, we have a lot of IP built behind us. But again, as I say, having that very, very focused approach, I think is what is a key to surviving and being needed in the market and working with others and then winning.
So you're all painting a picture of uh, lots of winners because the market's so big, and because we all eat 3 times a day or so more, and I am probing here a little bit about what is the role of yet more new co's into this space. And so a lot of investors are really on the fence as to whether picks and shovels companies are going to work. And yet it sounds like you're saying if you can really focus and be the best in the world at something, even if you're not making food products, you're part of the tech stack, you can survive in this market. So I'll just take that to Sandia and Lisa. Do you both, if there's a new fermentation technology, new bioreactor design, new way of improving your yield and doing strain engineering, like a new cell media company or a robot media exchange company. I mean, all manner of things are out there. Uh, Do you feel like those can work in this future market that's being built, or are people trying to be Tesla and trying to say, I'm going to own it all, and I'm going to acquire people, and I'm not really going to work with outsiders?
At least for Shiok meats, it's a hybrid approach. So first thing I say is I don't want to do it all. What we are really good at is the tech side of things, which is growing the cells, making them into meat, and a bit of media development. So that's sort of what we are really good at. But what we'd like to collaborate is on bioreactor design, yes, media development outside of the firm's sort of capabilities, as well as the structured protein at the end of the day. Our expertise is not structured protein yet. We make minced meat, but we're happy to work with companies that have the scaffold or the hydrogel and so on in terms of technology. So I actually say this with a lot of conviction. I think there should not be any more new cultivated meat companies coming up, honestly, but there should be a lot more cultivated meat ancillary companies coming up. Anything to do with media components, supply chain, logistics. We are talking about a frozen product at the end of the day. Most cultivated meat companies are working with frozen products. The frozen product logistic and supply chain is a nightmare. It's not easy at all. Even in the normal, your conventional frozen food products, it's a nightmare in terms of transportation. And I think COVID has added a extra layer of complexity to it. Um, and it's going to stay for a long time, right? So you're moving more and more towards less shelf stable products, less fresh products, into more frozen products, and that means the entire world needs to change the way we consume food, the way from where we buy it, how do we ship it, how do we store it. So everything from logistics, supply chain, packaging, labeling, distribution, media development, bioreactor design, large scale manufacturing plants, infrastructure, all of this is not what all companies like us have built yet, because we are so concentrated on the R&D and the innovation that we want to get it to a particular stage. And of course, for all of the above that I mentioned, you need a lot of capital. And that hasn't been poured into yet. So I would really encourage more companies to come up in the ancillary side of things for the alternative protein industry. So we can get to a point where tomorrow, if Shiok Meats is producing, I don't know, 1,000 tons of the meat every day, I do have a logistics and a supply chain management company that's able to handle all of that distribution, take care of what I'm producing, and half of it doesn't go down the drain, for example. We are all working towards a zero waste sustainable food system, and it can't be that we are producing amazing food and you know we are not able to distribute it properly. So I think that's the way to go. But I would have actually liked these ancillary companies to come up before the cultivated meat companies started up, because it takes a while to get a bioreactor design right and get to a larger manufacturing scale. It takes time for the logistic and the supply chain sort of ERP system or whichever system to be put in place. But I'm glad that there are more and more companies coming up. And honestly, I think investors should invest in these ancillary companies a lot more, because the cultivated meat companies sound really sexy, but you need these ancillary companies to make those cultivated meat companies a huge success.
So, Lisa, I want to push this a little further as I hand it to you. Sandy is talking about all of these logistics and supply chains and distribution partners. So we're going, as you're building your business, and it's way beyond just this outstanding value proposition to consumers around climate, and it's really good tasting food. With all of the logistics involved, what are you seeing can help separate winners from losers or best practices in this space?
Very, very interesting. Let me start by saying that this space is huge. 1.4 trillion, meat market, and we have a long way to go. We're nowhere near the promised land. So in my mind, there's a lot of room for many more participants in this. Participants in terms of new companies, researchers across the board. Universities, research institutes. We need a lot more investment into this space so that we can compete, very cost effectively and scale, versus the industry that's been here as long as it's been here. If you think about it right now, it takes 2 years to make a steak. It's a very inefficient way of producing, but that industry has been around for a long time and they've figured out how to get the cost down incredibly low. So there's a huge opportunity. We're nowhere near the promised land at the moment. So there's a lot of opportunities. So there's different technologies out there. I think Sandia's point about the logistics is really an important one. Different technologies have different requirements, as it were. We all have to, distribute our product at some point, but we have different technical needs, as it were. So there's a lot of opportunities for startups to emerge around that. And there just will be at some point acquisitions. We do need those new ideas. We need those fresh ideas. We need those bodies, those people working on different solutions, and those become acquisition targets for companies, so that we can kind of bring that technology in house and make our solutions even better and more efficient and more scalable and able to compete against the incumbents.
I want to bring a new area of questioning for you guys: the war for talent. You need people with great commercialization expertise. You need people who are great food scientists or chemists. And here in the Bay Area, people are swapping. They've gone through their vesting cycles. They're moving around quite a bit now. And I'm wondering how geography plays into this. On one hand, it's like very, very hard to hire new people. On the other hand, I know people in other markets who are moving here because they just don't have the technological depth of talent in the market that they're in. And I'm wondering what you guys feel like for if you were a new company today, how does geography play into the question of the role, the sort of the how do I get really great people at my company? Well, Sandy, you're being from Singapore. Let's start with you.
It's been extremely hard, but I think it's been hard because there's just general lack of the number of people that we all need. And we know that it's hundreds of companies right now looking for the same talent in different geographical locations. But I think what Singapore has done very well is, other than, doing the 30 by 30 mandate where they want to increase the food production by 30% internally in Singapore from the current 10% to 2030, I think they've attracted really good talent and people to like turn their heads towards Singapore and look at what Singapore has to offer and what Asia has to offer as well. So I would say at Shiok Needs, we've been, touchwood, a bit blessed with the hiring, and we've managed to find really good people, but it doesn't come without the wait time of about 6 to 8 months between us sort of putting out the job ad and waiting for this person to come and join us, with all visa regulations and everything, and them, leaving their current jobs and moving over and all of that. And again, I keep bringing the pandemic up because it has added an extra layer of complexity to the whole border restrictions and the regulations and travel and all of that. So it's been a crazy ride, but we grew from 2 to 35 in 3 years time, and it's not happened just like that. And I would like to say that about 70% of the people that we have hired were random CVs sent to us. It wasn't part of a job ad that they saw and they applied. They came across our company, they were following it for a couple of months or even a couple of years before they wrote to us and said, I'm really interested. These are my skill sets. I know I don't see a job ad on your website or anywhere, but if you're looking for someone like me, let me know and we can chat. And we've had people where we chatted and we felt that the person needs to join us like almost immediately because the person's attitude and the skill set was perfect, maybe not yet required for us, but we could bring them in the next couple of months. And when we have the requirement, this person would fit in perfectly well. But I do see a lot of companies struggling. I mean, we just acquired Gaia Foods, as you know, and we are looking for more talent as well. We're in fact putting out our job ads very soon. So we're doing a massive hiring sort of period with them. I don't know how it's going to pan out, but I have a feeling because it's mammalian cells, we might have more talent compared to seafood cells for Shiok, for example. And one of the things we have noticed is that when we seek out people or when we scout them or when we speak to our ex-colleagues or friends who are in the same field, and they go like, but I don't think my skills fit a food industry. But then I go back to them and say, do you know how to grow stem cells? And that's all I need at this point, for example. And do you know how to operate a bioreactor? We can make you train to think about food, even though you're in the biomedical sciences. So I think people are slowly realizing that their skill sets do fit the food industry in various forms, shapes, and sizes. And And it's taken a while to reach that point.
Lisa, how do you balance hiring either R&D people versus commercial people, or as Sandia says, food people versus people who are technology people but don't think of themselves as food people?
Well, we need all of that. I'll comment on your other question first by saying that with COVID, we've actually embraced this remote aspect of working, and of course, people that need to be in the lab need to be in the lab, and that's just what it is. But the last three people we hired are not local to California. One is in Tennessee, one is in Brazil, and one is in New York, and they're core team members, and they're actually here now because we're having an offsite today, flying them in to, integrate them with the team. So that's one thing that I think is an advantage when you look at the broader team. If you hire an engineer who's a part of designing, they don't necessarily have to sit in the same place with everyone else. If you hire, a commercial person, they can sit elsewhere. And so we're really leveraging that. And in terms of the team itself, of course, you need commercial people in order to commercialize. You need the R&D people. The comment that I'll make is we're all doing something new. We're doing new science, and so many of the skills that we're looking for may be in places that are not that obvious. And so we don't just have to look for food scientists. We look for chemists and microbiologists and beyond. And these are all skills that are helping us to build our companies and our new technology platform. So that's also it's an advantage or just a reality of what we're doing. It's integrated science and engineering in order to create these new technologies.
We have just about 3 minutes left, so I want to open it up in this way, which is, I'll say it this way. In autonomous vehicles, there's quite a public debate about LiDAR versus machine vision. I think investors and founders like to know what you're debating inside your industry. Now, I know food tech conferences, it's a lot of talking about yourself without quite giving anything away. So maybe you could do a version of it is within your own senior management team. What are the kinds of things that you internally debate as you look forward to the journey of growing these businesses? And what are you guys racking your minds on? Let's find out if there's parallels here.
Um, I think definitely in our field, one of the things that is always popular to debate, and we, even though we're very set on what we're doing, still keep talking about it, is are we what is our business model as a company? Are we what is where does the highest value lie in what we're doing? So are we a B2B or are we a B2C company? And that might seem like super trivial and superficial, but actually comes down a lot, even speaking with investors, fundraising, speaking with people you actually want to collaborate with or sell your products to. And there is a lot more layers there and nuances within those two. But in principle, I think what it comes down in alternative protein via precision fermentation to is, are you making this that I mentioned, like hero ingredient, this key ingredient, and you're going to be this ingredient provider, and you have to just being no easy feat solve for that, or are you actually a food company? Are you a product, consumer facing brand? And I think that decision for a new culture was very obvious that we are a food company, we're a cheese company, and we want to bring cheese to the world. But how do you actually execute that most successfully still is a big challenge, right? Do you go into the food service? Do you work with restaurants? Do you go directly to consumer? What do you do in times of COVID and times of uncertainty like that? Like how does that affect your thinking about channels you will launch in? This is definitely debated a lot in our field, and for us as a consumer facing brand, how do we still plug into the supply chain, into the infrastructure, and how do we work with other companies and with dairy companies to achieve this mission we have, which is to change the entire planet infrastructure for feeding. So yeah, that's something that I would say is very a hot topic always, and both for us internally and when we speak with other companies in the field.
It's reassuring to the new companies that questions such as B2C versus B2B, or you know build or buy, are the questions they're asking are ones that you're even asking at the later stage. Sandy or Lisa, any final words on questions that are racking your senior management team, or perennial questions for how you'd build your companies?
One comment that I'll make about the industry as a whole is this question of taste versus nutrition, and that's kind of one of the things that we're all balancing is navigating that taste versus nutrition, and that's I think the initial companies that came out were really focused on taste, proving that you can make things that are not made with animals directly, like a cow that you grow, and you can make it delicious, and which is great. That's kind of built this industry, as it were. It's phenomenal. And then now, there's more talk about, is there a trade-off that we have to make as we make sure we're delivering kind of highly nutritious products as well. So that's what I'd highlight.
Great. We'll need
Yeah,
to wrap up. I'm just go ahead and cut it off. I apologize for cutting you off, Sandia. We've got to go. I've got to hand it back to Gwen to on with the show. I want to thank all of you for appearing with us here at SOSV's Climate Tech Conference. Much appreciated. And please stick around the rest of the day. Back to you, Gwen.